everybody. I'm Shultz, the Executive Director of Beta and Twin Cities Startup Week, and I am so excited about our current panel focused on sustainable energy with a focus on solar and battery power and how they work together to create the future of our power grid. I am joined today by an amazing panel. We have Julian Ryba White, a partner at Nokomis Energy, Adam Iliff, co-founder of Vessel and senior project manager at Tesla, Sohan, vice president of renewable energy at EVS, and Pasi, chief development officer of Impact Power Solutions, which we'll probably just call IPS Solar for the remainder of this call, but it stands for Impact Power Solutions. So real quick, I want to give each of you an opportunity to share a little bit about your background, what you're currently working on, and then we're going to jump into some really meaty conversations around our current energy system, where solar and batteries are now, and our vision for the future. So Julian, can you share a little bit about yourself and Nokomis Energy?
Sure. Thanks, Casey, for having me, and appreciate getting included in what is a much smarter panel, I think, than me. So, yeah, Nokomis Energy is a firm that I co-founded with a couple other people about 3.5 years ago. We're a community scale energy developer. We focus on 1 to 20 megawatt generators set on the electric distribution system. So as compared to the wholesale or the transmission system, we really try to focus on the distribution system. Our primary solutions today are solar plus storage, but our primary focus just is understanding what customers are looking for in their energy supply and helping them achieve those goals. Kind of our story as a firm is a lot like my personal story. A core leadership team spent about 10 years each working for national scale clean energy developers, Solar City, Tesla, SunEdison, EDF, names that people in the industry will recognize. And our strength is kind of that we've lived on the front lines of kind of the global energy transition for the last 10 years at a national and even to some extent global scale. And we've kind of learned what are those best practices, what are those technologies that work, what doesn't. And then we've kind of formed here to bring that more to a regional level where you can kind of bring some of those best practices, but then also kind of avoid some of the pitfalls of being too big, missing out on customer service, not being local, not understanding, the trends in the local region. So we feel like, our goal is to marry a combination of kind of best in class understanding with kind of that local touch that really gives you the best kind of customer solution. And so that's what we're doing there. And then, my background, just briefly, I started at Solar City about 2007, so 12 years ago now. And spent 7 years there, went public there, was involved in some acquisitions of some major companies like Zep Solar before moving to the Twin Cities and eventually getting into Nokomis. So a little bit about me.
Awesome. And then I have to mention that we know each other because we went to Presidio graduate school together in San Francisco.
We did, although I think it's important to note that you finished and I had a kid and decided not to finish school. So that's my excuse I use. I throw my daughter under the bus for not finishing Presidio, but it was a great space and it was really fun to meet such a positive, group of people, yourself included.
Yeah, we had the best class. It was super fun.
Yep, we did have the best class.
Adam, can you share a little bit about, well, you're an entrepreneur yourself. You're launching Vessel, which is a battery storage startup, while also working as a senior project manager for Tesla. So tell us everything that you're working on.
Right on, Casey. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Just a little bit about me. I come out of 20 years experience in the commercial construction and operations field. Been overseas for 7 years. Came back to the United States in 2015 with my family to raise my kids as Americans. And we landed in St. Paul, Minnesota. And the last 4 years, I've been with Solar City, which became Tesla. And I build some of the larger battery storage systems for Tesla, both here and also in Canada and Mexico. And then solar plus energy storage for commercial and industrial customers. So that's kind of what I've been doing and what I'm doing now. And the last 3 years have really been looking at the energy space, renewable energy space, trying to feel and find a way in where I could have my own company again, and found a really nice, large, underserved market for Vessel. And so Vessel is a energy storage device that provides backup power generation for buildings with larger power needs that mainly are tied to single phase power. So we don't serve the industrial or utility or large commercial market, which is tied to 3-phase power, but operate off of single phase power and also tied into solar as well.
Nice. What would your typical customer look like for that?
Sure. So remote locations, rural locations, light commercial buildings, light manufacturing facilities, homes with large power needs. So really large, I don't want to get too technical, but 600 amp, 800 amp, 1200 amp breaker panels, farms, churches. So most of those buildings are tied to single phase power, and that's kind of our sweet spot. So
that's great. I mean, that does sound like a large market to tap into. So good for you.
Thank you.
Sohan, can you tell us a little bit more about your work as the Vice President of Renewable Energy at EVS and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Casey, for inviting me to this panel. It's great to be with the great minds here. Yeah, it's a little bit about my background. I have been doing solar for about 11 years now, and energy storage. Started working as an engineer for a developer in New York. And I was there for 3 years, a company called Safari Energy. And then I moved around a little bit, worked at a large EPC called Wanzek Construction. They used to do large wind projects and utility scale solar projects. And got the opportunity to start the solar group at EVS back in 2014. So it's been 6 years now. And it was a great opportunity. I took it on, and fast forward 6 years, we have about 55 people working specifically in solar. We do electrical engineering, civil engineering, structural engineering, and land surveying. Have done about little more than 3.5 gigawatts of solar projects and storage projects as well. So yeah, that's a little bit of my background and EVS's background as well.
Awesome, thank you. And Eric, last but not least, can you tell us a little bit more about Impact Power Solutions and what your background is? And I have to mention that you have a book coming out, so you are definitely an expert in this field, enough to put word to paper, which I know is no small feat. So congratulations on your new book.
Thank you very much, Casey. And thanks for having me. My name's Eric Pasi. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Impact Power Solutions. Much like the other folks on the panel here, I have about 13 years of experience in solar. I joined IPS right out of college. I was looking for a small business experience, and it was about as small as it got. I think there were 6 people working there at the time. And we've rode the solar coaster over the last dozen years. And for those that are in it, they know exactly what I'm talking about. We contracted down to, I think, the 3 principals in 2012. And then since about 2015, we've grown the revenues about 20-fold since that time. And really grown up in the community solar space. So what we work on is predominantly community solar projects and commercial and industrial projects. So working with larger energy users on solutions that make the most sense for them. And just as you mentioned, Casey, I've got a book coming out. It's called Clean Wave, A Guide to Success in the Green Recovery, which comes out on October 18th. And it really takes readers through the past, present, and future of clean tech and offering actionable solutions for those that are looking for employment in the market. And so, yeah, I'm super happy to be here and share some of my ideas and thoughts.
Well, we're really happy to have you. Did you just say solar coaster? Is that
The
an
solar
industry
coaster.
term?
Roller
Everybody's
coaster.
nodding.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I
Oh
just
yeah.
learned something new. And you're right, but it has been a solar coaster because depending on, you know, I know there was like a big peak because there was a lot of government initiatives where there was a lot of subsidies coming out, and then those kind of expired. So that's probably what you're talking about, where then there's a dip in the market and now a lot of those are coming back. So is that the solar coaster, or are you also talking about something else?
Yeah, it's mainly based, what we do is very in the solar industry is super local. It's highly local. And so when we have an adjustment in policies or utility regulations, that can affect us to a great degree. So yes, kind of the ebb and flow of the market. I don't know who coined the phrase solar coaster, but it's stuck with most everybody, and it definitely obviously relates to the ebb and flow of what we do.
That's so funny. I just learned a new term. Sohan, can you help us understand the landscape? Like, explain how our energy grid works, and how does solar currently fit into that, and then how does like energy storage fit into that? I'd love to hear just like, where are we today?
Yeah, it's a very heavy topic, but I'll try to keep it small, short if I can. Means we are the country is divided into bigger chunks of grids, like PJM, ERCOT, CAISO, and the way the grid works, basically, these are little islands, like large islands of transmission, distribution, and obviously there's all kinds of power, solar, wind, coal, natural gas, all of it. What we see in the future that would be really helpful for renewables and just overall reduce price is connecting these super grids together. And through, just recently there has been just a lot of talk about high voltage DC lines. We have a lot of solar and wind in Texas. We have a lot of solar in California. And if we can bring that energy into other states that are not as suitable for solar or not as great for wind through high voltage transmission lines, that's going to really, really help. There has been a report by the DOE that came out, but it was suppressed, about the need for high voltage DC transmission lines, and how it will help kind of reduce pricing for everyone. It will also just accelerate the demise of coal if that happens, right? So there has been a lot of pressure, not for those kind of reports not to come out. But Europe is doing exactly that. They are connecting all their countries, the European Union, through high voltage transmission lines, and they have been able to exchange. Wind-rich areas are giving power to areas that are not as wind-rich, and same thing with solar. And they are actually ahead of us on this curve. So, yeah, and with solar and storage, we can use it to have energy independence, but also it's a matter of national security. So if we put more solar and storage on the grid, at the same time, we can upgrade the transmission so that it's also secure, and we can protect our grid against foreign elements. We can add a lot of very, very good protection mechanisms through relays, through whatever it is. And then also with solar and storage, you have the flexibility to kind of not rely on one big power plant. You can go distributed, you can go large scale if you want. With the fire, in California, right? Like microgrids are becoming so important, right? To have, all these options, and you just get a lot more flexibility with storage and solar. And the grid is very old. It's very rigid, and it has to change with these new technologies. So there's a lot to unpack there, but try to keep it as short as I could.
No, and I think that you touch on such an important point, especially as we're seeing on the West Coast with these massive wildfires that are not only, like knocking out the grid, but it's also happening during like unprecedented heat wave. So now people are stuck in these houses that are 110, 120 degrees, and they can't run their AC because there's rolling blackouts because of the way the grid is designed. And so, yeah, there's definitely, I think, and I mean, the wildfires are one example, but even in Minnesota, we have tornadoes, in certain parts of the state. So having a combination of microgrids that that can operate independently, but yet still can pull from these high voltage power lines and get renewable energy from around the country seems like that has to be the future if we want to really pursue energy independence, which I think is probably in the best interest of our country, and trying to get off, like oil and gas and coal, just in long-term like economics, and also of course it's better for the planet. So it's like win-win-win, and cheaper for people if we do that. So it sounds like there's a lot of there's a clear path to sustainability. We just need the political will and the economics to align to make it happen. Which brings me to my next question. Julian, can you explain what are the current economics of solar and energy storage?
Yeah, I think Sohan kind of pointed out, the system is so variable, it's so complex. At the wholesale level, you have, 7 or 8 different grids. At the distribution level, you have thousands of individual distribution systems in the country. And the economics on each of those differ. But when you just look and you kind of boil it down to the basics of the cost of generation, a lot of people have heard this lately, but the cost of coal is now significantly higher than the cost of solar, the cost of wind, the cost of natural gas. And so that's the number one reason why, we've seen a lot of coal closures, and we hear stories about the death of coal. Is just a combination of the rate of decline in cost of wind and solar in combination with similarly cheap natural gas, kind of through fracking and other technologies. Solar specifically has been on the steepest cost decline. And one of the most interesting things about solar is it's the simplest of all of these forms of electricity. It is truly a commoditized, refined mineral. I mean, it is silicon refined. And so it behaves based on the laws of, commercial scaling, right? You can create that, you scale manufacturing and costs come down significantly, right? And so we've seen that in computer chips, we've seen that, and solar experiences that same traditional cost curve. The other thing about solar that is so unique is that it is truly the most flexible generation type we've ever seen. I mean, a solar panel is, 6 feet tall by 3 feet wide. It's kind of like the size of your average human in some sense. It weighs like 45 pounds, 50 pounds. And from that, you can generate electricity. And if you go back in the history of the creation of the electric grid, it used to be that the only way you generate electricity is if you built a $500 million power plant. And so we built a whole grid and system based on that. And so when we look at the current economics of solar, all of those things come together to create a scenario where solar right now in the US at a utility scale on the whole scale market, as Sohan was talking about, really competes it's starting to compete at parity in many places. It's the cheapest form of new electricity in places like Texas and Arizona, California. It's starting to become, in Florida, things like that. It beats out natural gas. It beats out many of those other forms. Wind is often what it's competing with. So that's a good thing, right? If we're just competing against the other clean resources. But even as we move north into places like Minnesota, Wisconsin, things like that, you're seeing dramatic deployments of large scale solar on the wholesale grid. And so we're starting to see costs get into the 3 cents a kilowatt hour, $30 a megawatt hour range on these utility scale projects, which is, dramatic. For comparison,
perspective, what would you compare that to a traditional?
So like a natural gas, like a combined cycle natural gas plant, which is usually what is the other option to build when we're building large generation, will sit in that same range. It'll sit anywhere from, $30 to $35 a megawatt hour up to $55 a megawatt hour. And, these assets are playing on the wholesale system. They're playing in a wholesale market. And so that pure cost doesn't reflect that, you know, solar produces when the sun is up, natural gas produces, you know, 24/7. So there are some differences we have to think about when we think about the cost of energy and our energy sources. But the thing I would want to talk about that I think is most dramatic right now and is most disruptive, if we're thinking about kind of startups and startup businesses and stuff, is the build out of solar on the distribution system, on our roofs, at our businesses, behind our meters, in our communities. We've never put generation there before in the history of, you know, since maybe, Edison, was building coal power plants in basements. I mean, as soon as we went to hydro, we went to big centralized systems and we stopped building generation and so I think that's the place where we have both a massive cost decline because of the commoditization and the fuel-free costs of solar, but we also have places where electricity costs might be high. They might be, $120 a megawatt hour compared to say $30 on the grid. And now we can take that same technology that we can deploy electricity for $30 a megawatt hour and deploy it on your roof at your business and, reduce your costs significantly because of the locational value of deploying, generation right where the load is needed. And it doesn't say that we don't need things like the transmission system and these high voltage DC grids. We absolutely need those. But if we're going to optimize the system, we need both. And so that's the place where I think the most dramatic changes to our system are occurring. What Adam is working on his startup side is exactly that. How can I help with costs at where generation is being used and not just where it's being produced? And so, when we produce something right where we use it, we cut out a lot of cost. And that's one of the most, I think, things driving a lot of, trends with solar on top of just the pure cost reductions due to the commoditization.
Julian, you bring up a great point where, natural gas, coal, those are 24-hour operations. You can only produce solar when there's sun. Adam, I think this is probably where energy storage comes in, which is what you're focused on. Can you explain how does energy storage, like batteries, enable this more sustainable system and this more like hyper-local energy production and energy usage with solar?
Sure. So energy storage is kind of the game changer to really change the energy markets, I think, when tied with, and we'll talk about solar specifically, but energy tied with solar at the local level, but also at the utility scale level is a game changer. So you now can compete with fossil fuel and natural gas plants at the 24/7 level. So obviously solar produces power when the sun is out, and then energy storage systems hold that power and then release it when people need it, right? So hopefully you pair that in a way that that system can run 24/7 and there's no lag at all. So if we can think of it both on the local level, but also utility level, in PG&E territory, Tesla's building their Moss Landing project, which is over 100 megawatts of energy storage to stabilize the grid. There's a couple other projects starting to happen in California, which are hundreds of megawatts of energy storage as well, all to stabilize the grid. At the same time, we have rolling blackouts by PG&E because we have an aged infrastructure. So we have 5,000 orders for nursing homes, hospitals, water treatment facilities needing energy storage as backup power to help with those rolling blackouts. What's interesting is the company I currently work for, Tesla, can only supply about 500 of those 5,000 orders. So we're only able to meet 10% of the market. And this can lead into later questions and conversation, but I think it's a game changer. I think we're at the very early stages of this, and I'm really excited about the next 10 to 20 years of where energy storage is going to take us.
And you bring up a really interesting point, like not only does energy storage need to work with solar, but you know, it can also just plug into the general grid that we have already and help just create that stability for businesses and homes. One thing I wanted to ask you, or I don't know who might want to take this question, is what are the trends that you're seeing as far as like installation and size? So for example, I consulted with Facebook so long ago. I think it was like 2013. So this might be outdated, but they were looking at like, how do we save money on energy? How do we, they were looking at like peak energy shaving using battery storage. And for anybody who doesn't know what peak energy shaving is, it's the idea that at night when energy is cheaper, you're charging these batteries. And then during the day when you have everybody in the office, ACs are running, and that's when energy is most expensive, you're then deploying the energy from the batteries and you're like literally shaving these peak charges off of your energy costs, and it can save you millions of dollars a year. But what we found with Facebook is their campus is built up against protected marshland. So they didn't have anywhere to put this, and then their rooftop had their HVAC system. So they ended up like, we found several buildings that it was economically feasible to do this, but they were just like, we literally don't have any place to put these batteries. So what are you finding when you're working with companies? Like, is that something that you're coming up against where you're trying to find places to put solar and you're having to retrofit things? Or like with batteries, are batteries getting smaller to the point where they're more viable for businesses that maybe like didn't plan for having space for that kind of stuff?
Can I add my 2 cents?
Yes.
So on the solar side, what's difficult is most of the businesses in the United States are small to medium-sized businesses that do not own their own buildings. Mm-hmm. So we're running into the issue of the business owner wants to have solar on top of their roof. They just we can't put together finance packages for that person if their lease ends in 5 years, right? So that's kind of the difficulty there. And then with the energy storage, we're coming up against, it's such a new technology. The testing is still happening. UL listings are still happening in the field sometimes. Fire departments on the local or regional level don't always understand energy storage and the difference between lithium ion or lithium ferrous phosphate. What we're moving into is energy storage that can be put in buildings. I'm seeing a trend towards batteries using lithium ferrous phosphate technology, which is a water-based electrolyte, which can actually be installed inside a building. It doesn't have to have the 5-foot or 30-foot clearances that a lithium ion battery has to have. So that's kind of exciting, looking at the LFP technologies and seeing where we can locate those inside the building.
I want to jump in because Adam pointed out an issue they often see, which is issues with financing due to ownership in these buildings. And in Minnesota specifically, we have one of the largest, if not the largest, community solar program in the country. And one of the primary purposes of a program like community solar is that it allows you to have what we call virtual metering, meaning I can have a project where it makes sense to put the project, and I can facilitate the benefits of that project economically to businesses and individuals who can't otherwise capture the benefits directly on their own home. And so this is what, Eric has, carved his teeth on. As you mentioned earlier, this is a lot of what, my firm Nokomis does. I know Sohan's designed a lot of these projects. So there are a lot of solutions, and they're enabled a lot by a combination of, business interest, and, kind of regulatory policy, frankly, that, identify issues like this and then solve them through, solutions like community solar.
Yeah, Julian, can you and Eric explain a little bit more, like what is community solar? You kind of touched on it, but explain exactly what it is, and then what kind of projects are you seeing around community solar? I know, Eric, you said you've done over a dozen solar projects for the Mounds View School District. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I'll take a step back. Community solar is a concept where ratepayers or customers of a utility that either can't or don't want to have solar on their own property can participate with others in a larger offsite solar project. And so if you can kind of conceptualize a solar in a farm field, creates energy. At the end of the month, the utility apportions out the percentage of bill credits to each individual participant. And so in Minnesota, we've done 50 to 100 of those just around the states. Trends that we're seeing on the customer side really kind of point to what both Adam and Julian have mentioned, is that we've got large large energy users that want to do solar, but one of the major pitfalls in solar is that we typically don't want to install that equipment on an old roof or on a roof that the client doesn't own. And so we have a solution in those cases to offer, like Julian mentioned, these offsite solar projects. This is becoming more popular in other areas of the country. Maine just passed a law where you can essentially just locate all the solar panels for your entire facility somewhere else in the state, which is really interesting and creating new opportunities for basically disruption. Community solar is probably the largest, or I should say the fastest growing segment of the solar market, and it's mainly done via regulation or policy at the state levels. And so that's why you'll see a lot of these programs popping up in one state but not in other state, and that's essentially because of the policy differences.
I think about it on almost, I think Eric is kind of spot on with all that. And I boil it down almost to, on a distribution system, it is a monopoly, right? It's a utility there. And most distribution systems, really all distribution systems that I aware of, are not a market. It's not a buy and sell wherever you want. And so what things like community solar or virtual net metering policies do is they kind of create kind of like a quasi market. And in a sense, they say, hey, if you can figure out where there's a place on this distribution system that you can create an economic return, meaning you could generate, it costs you less to build something than the value you get for selling that electricity into the system, then, you've got an asset that people want to invest in. And primarily in community solar, you invest in that asset by saying, I will buy that electricity, right? I will give my buying power to that asset. I will invest in that asset by saying, long-term, I will purchase that electricity. And in exchange, you'll receive part of that economic benefit that citing that system somewhere on the distribution grid created for the system, right? The grid costs so much to run, and if we can run it cheaper, if we can run it more efficiently, if we can run it smarter, if we can pay less for energy, then those people that help facilitate that should get a chance to share in the benefit. And that's what, subscribers ultimately are getting when they're doing community solar. If they're getting savings through that, is they're actually just getting a portion of you helping lower the total cost of the system.
If somebody wants to get into community solar, like myself, I think I did like some online assessment, and our roof doesn't get enough light to make sense to put solar on it, but I would love to be using more solar for our energy. Like, how does the average person get in on one of those projects?
You want to take that, Eric?
Yeah, there are certain like public, I would say, resources that are out there. One that comes to mind in Minnesota is Clean Energy Resource Team, which kind of aggregates all of the community solar providers into one place, and then allows for people to kind of do their own research and contact and reach out to those firms directly. There are, depending on what state you're located in, I would certainly look to your local Solar Energy Industry Association to find out which companies are offering those services in your market.
Great. Yeah, that's super exciting. It sounds like Minnesota might be pretty progressive with our policies if we have all these community solar projects popping up. How would you rate Minnesota compared to other states?
I think that's right. I think one of the most interesting, they definitely got into this game early, and Eric would know better than me, but I do think it is the largest community solar program in the country, formally in that sense. Minnesota ranks somewhere in the top 20, I think, for clean energy deployed, total, including total solar deployed. So, solar and these things work in northern climates. But I think specifically, I think one of the most interesting things, and one of the reasons we started our firm, the program is 2013, Eric, like 6 or 7 years old now.
5 years. I think the project was about 5 years ago.
Yeah, the regulation maybe was 2013, but about 5 years old. In 2017, they changed some of the rules. And so the compensation rules moved from kind of you could argue it was a subsidized rate to really an unsubsidized rate that just says, what is the value of deploying clean energy? We call it the value of solar or the value of distributed generation. And they moved to that. And now it does create a more market-based rules where you're tied to, well, what are the costs on the system we're avoiding? And so I think, to that end, we have really progressive, forward-thinking groups like Fresh Energy, different policy groups in the state that have done an excellent job trying to understand how you drive more, market-oriented rules into the system. And that's really allowed clean energy to come in and compete really aggressively here.
Adam, before we started this panel, I love hearing like where we are as a state in Minnesota, but you and Sohan were kind of having a conversation about like, how are we doing globally, or like, what is the global landscape? And you've lived abroad for a long time, so you have a pretty unique perspective. Like, can you give us some more insights on how do we compare to the globe? Especially, I know like Sohan was talking about how Europe is really investing in these high voltage power lines, which we are not, unfortunately, yet. Knock on wood. So just give us a little bit more information about that.
I'd love to hear Sohan give a little more depth to what Europe is doing, and maybe China. Sohan, I don't know if you know what the Asian markets are, how they're doing in solar and battery storage. I definitely know the energy storage side over there, but Sohan, could you speak to the solar?
Yeah, I can just speak a little bit. We talked about the high voltage transmission work being done in Europe, and that's really forward thinking. And I think it'll come in the US as well. It's just a matter of time, but we are lagging behind. But, it's in Africa, and a lot of, I was born and raised in India. A lot of places, it's actually compared to the cell phone technology, right? A lot of countries move from not having landline phones to cell phones directly, a lot of rural areas. And that's what is happening in a lot of like villages and small, places in Africa and India, that people are actually without electricity, and they're moving directly to solar and energy storage. And so that is really encouraging, really nice to see that they don't have to depend on coal. But China obviously is a huge superpower when it comes to solar manufacturing, construction. They are way ahead of everyone. And, we have, US has also capitalized quite a bit on that, but there's a lot more to be done in the US.
Yeah. I think speaking about manufacturing, most of the batteries themselves are produced in China and South Korea. Europe, there's a company, Northvolt, a couple executives that came out of Tesla started Northvolt up in Sweden, and they're really grabbing hold in Scandinavia and Germany as well. So the European manufacturing market in batteries is definitely up and coming. US, obviously, we have the Gigafactory over in Nevada. I am excited to see
Tesla Gigafactory, right? Tesla.
Yeah, Tesla Gigafactory, yeah, out in Sparks, Nevada, in conjunction with Panasonic out there. But I'm excited to see where U.S. manufacturing is going. Obviously, we're 50 states. We can't move policy like Germany can or China with its one-party system. So we have a bunch of different stakeholders, which makes us super unique and sometimes a little bit slower moving. But I think once you kind of start rolling our train forward, that once we understand what it is and how we are going to do it, I think we're going to be able to get there. Might not be in 2 years, but I definitely, in the next 5 to 10, I'm excited to see where we are on the manufacturing side. So, and definitely we're deploying energy storage almost more than any other country in the whole world. So we're leading the understanding of how energy storage operates with the grid and how it operates with solar as a complete package.
The U.S. is, I mean, it's such an interesting market. I mean, it has the 50 states. You can think of that as kind of 50 different approaches to tackling something. And so you get all these different ideas tested and best practices. You have this great research and development system, university system. You have amazing research happening here. You know, a lot of stuff is figured out here, right? A lot of new battery chemistry, solar cells, you know, are figured out here. And then you have this global supply chain. And, you know, we were talking about the solar coaster early on, and that's one of, if not maybe the largest contributor to the solar coaster. Is I can't tell you 3 months that have gone by where the cost of a solar cell hasn't changed, you know, 10% from when I talked to them last. You know, just they're being built everywhere. You know, there's so much supply chain involved. There's shipping. There's, you know, a fire at, you know, some, you know, manufacturing plant can cause 10% of the global supply to disappear for 3 months. I mean, it just, these things can happen very dramatically. You get things like the tsunamis in Japan, and suddenly we can't get certain parts for the inverters that are key to it. So, you know, just that global nature, I think too, is something that, you know, I think there's real value to, you know, making sure that we have good, you know, American manufacturing. But I also think, similar to the high voltage DC concept, you know, we're interconnected, it's global, you know, it's, you know, these markets are too big for any one country to self-service. And, you know, so we have to, you know, we have to think about how we participate in that system as opposed to, you know, standing solo.
You bring up a really good point. You know, we keep talking about how, you know, the majority of solar panels are manufactured in China or South Korea. There's all these parts being manufactured in Asia that go into these components. And then we were also talking about how solar and wind economically make way more sense than coal. So it's only a matter of time before, hopefully, you know, if we invest in the infrastructure to make it more scalable, that we can kind of get rid of coal completely, which now leaves an entire group of coal miners and coal plant workers who now don't have the same industry that they've grown up with. What do you see the future of, like, what should the country be doing to help migrate these coal workers, the coal communities, onto solar? Is there an opportunity to put manufacturing in, like, the Appalachian Mountains, build manufacturing plants?
Yeah.
Do you see that?
I'll speak just briefly to this, but I think Eric is probably, you know, the man for this question. But you know, in my view, you know, part of a government's role is to make sure that we help to facilitate, support the economy as it evolves. Make sure that training is there. That's why training is a, you know, university type, you know, it's a schooling type exercise. And I think similarly, the energy sector is so tied into regulatory policy, to policy in general, that you have to have policies to help make sure that you have programs to transition people in just ways. And I think your example, I know there are programs, for instance, in West Virginia trying to do just this, you know, teach coal miners how to install solar. And, you know, that is the fastest growing job in the country, if not the world, is solar installer. And I don't know the exact stats, but I bet Eric does. And I'll let him kind of speak to a little bit of this too.
Yeah, Eric, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the solar installer is that position is growing 16 times faster than the economy is. And so we're seeing a lot of opportunity. And I think where some of the folks in our industry can be pretty brash and actually, you know, standoffish when it comes to entrants coming from the fossil fuel industry. But I definitely have, saying folks should move, from Appalachia to where there are jobs. I'm not part of that camp. I think we definitely need to embrace these communities, and I think that we can. A few solutions that come to my mind. One being, if you're already in, say, a fossil fuel industry, it's easy to kind of translate skills from what you do in fossil fuels, whether it's geology, or if it's something related to finance, or if you're in a business development type role. You can certainly take those skills that may seem specific to fossil fuels, but it's energy that we're talking about. So it's pretty easy to actually take that skill set and then transfer it. The other opportunity that I see, or has been recently talked about, is that with COVID, we now are obviously we're here on this Zoom call, is to look at not only just distributed energy, but distributed workforces, and setting up kind of micro or small offices in these towns where you have talent that's consolidated, that can, more nimble, we can be more nimble as an industry to help adopt some of these folks that maybe are clustered in certain areas. So there are a lot of different ideas out there, but those are just a few of them that come to mind.
Thank you so much. I think it's really exciting that, if we can, when the car was invented, people who were buggy drivers were also out of a job, but then they adapted. And, we have all these instances in history where, as technology has advanced, our workforce has advanced and adapted. And so I think I agree that the government does have the resources and the vision where they need to be helping shepherd these communities into the future, hopefully, which is more sustainable. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for joining the panel today. We're coming up against time, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to, if you have one call to action for somebody who's either interested in getting into solar, or interested in investing in solar, or interested in making phone calls to Congress to demand that we start investing in infrastructure for solar and energy storage. I'm just going to go around the clock and call on each of you, and maybe just a quick parting word before we say goodbye. Sohan, not to put you on the spot, but what is your one call to action?
Yeah, actually, when you said that, I just thought of something just recent that came up recently. I watched a documentary called The Social Dilemma on Netflix.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's about how, some of the brightest minds in the world are just working towards, making people do more ad clicks on Facebook, or whatever it is. And there's a huge need for really good tech professionals in the solar industry, and especially with storage, with the battery management systems, SCADA, and all these high-tech needs in the solar industry. Means there's a huge need for tech people to kind of come into the solar industry, embrace the solar industry as well. So that's my call to action.
So quit your job at Facebook or Google AdSense and move into solar.
Think about what Silicon Valley is experiencing now with the wildfires. I mean, if ever there was a call to action, it's staring all of those really smart people in the face.
Is that your call to action, Julian?
I've seen this same film, and I've had this same conversation, and I think it is the call to action. Maybe just to give a little bit more color to whoever's out there spending their time kind of watching this. To me, energy is the intersection of technology, finance, kind of policy, and consumer behavior. And that might seem really complicated, but if you want to get an energy, you need to get in one of those spaces. I got an energy by getting on the ground floor. I just learned I started installing residential solar. And I think that's the best way to get into an industry. I think don't be afraid to get on the ground floor. And I feel like every day I rely on the fact that I know exactly what we're doing. I've been there, I've seen it, I put my hands on it, and I may sit at a computer a lot of days or talk to people on the phone, but I can always go back to can I understand fundamentally what we're doing, what we're tackling, what we're offering to people. And so, my thing, whenever I talk to people who are thinking about, getting into the space is, pick an area that you're interested in, make sure that you're passionate about, what you're going to be spending your time doing. Not every day of work is fun, but if you have a cause or a mission, that it's tied to, and don't be afraid to start on the ground floor. Come work for us, come work for Eric, come work for Sohan, come work for us. I think we're all hiring. We're definitely hiring. And I think we'll be excited to hear from people who made it 45 minutes through this and think it's all fascinating.
Adam, what's your call to action?
Right on. So I want to kind of speak to the investors and the startups out there and the kids with ideas. I believe that, okay, so the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons of the world, I believe have all picked the lowest hanging fruit. They've captured about 10% of the cash that's on the table. We're now moving into the other 90% of the cash on the table, which is regulated industries. So I would encourage investors to maybe start to move out of the mindset that software is the only game, that maybe there needs to be a hardware play in the markets over the next 10 to 20 years, that there could be some capital infusion there, and not to be so nervous about investing in hardware in the United States. But then also to the folks that have ideas, I believe that, yes, it's going to be a little bit harder to get into those regulated markets, but once you can take hold and get into those markets, I think it's going to pay off 1,000-fold more than it has in the last 30 years coming out of Silicon Valley. So
I mean, that's something that we teach at Beta. It's like, that's every barrier of entry that you can somehow get through makes your position that much more defensible, which investors love to see. So yes, like regulated industries and markets is a great way to, if you can figure out how to navigate it, it is a great business opportunity for entrepreneurs. So I'm glad you said.
Adam, I read today that, BP, right, the big, oil giant, they make about 8.5% returns on their natural gas investments.
Okay.
And they're currently forecasting, they're trying to make a big pivot into clean energy, as are all the big oil majors. And their most recent shareholder, kind of announcements and discussions about this are that they forecast conservatively that they'll make 8 to 10% on their clean energy investments. And when you think about that, what's so interesting about that from an oil company standpoint is clean energy doesn't have any fuel, right? The fuel's all free, right? The sun's free, the wind's free, right? Those types of things. And so there's only two places where you're really going to make money then, right? You're going to make money on the software that helps to facilitate distribution and customer engagement, blah, blah, and you're going to make money on hardware. What else is there ultimately in that 8.5% return, right? And so I think your point is exactly right.
Yeah, get out and start building some hardware, kids. Eric, take us home. What is your call to action?
Absolutely.
Besides buying your book.
Exactly. I love what Adam just mentioned right now. Bloomberg New Energy Finance projects that over the next 20 years, there will be $10 trillion in energy, clean energy investment worldwide. I think that number is woefully low. I think that'll happen probably in the next 5 to 10 years, actually. So, we're seeing hockey sticks all over the place, right? We're seeing exponential growth on solar deployment, clean energy deployment, battery deployment. The time is now to get involved. And yes, I wrote this book, Clean Wave: A Guide to Success in the Green Recovery. And I also have a chapter. It's chapter 8. It's about building a foundation in clean energy, and would invite everybody that's interested to go check it out. Book comes out on October 18th, and a big section in there on entrepreneurialism, and a lot of interviews with luminaries from the clean tech world. So I'm so excited to share it, and again, Casey and everybody on the panel, thanks for having me.
Thank you all. I learned so much talking with all of you today. It makes me especially bullish that, okay, the world feels like a scary place between pandemics, and natural disasters and global climate change that we're very much experiencing in our lifetime. But it looks like we have a roadmap to sustainable energy. We know we have the technology, it's possible, and the economics are there. So that makes me feel really hopeful that in the next, I don't know, decade, we can, you know, get the political will and the populist will to actually take it across the finish line. So thank you for all your inspiring words and very intelligent dialogue. And hopefully some of you can join us in the community lounge for some Q&A.